as I told you, I believe during the first class, what I want to do is not really focus on history, but to walk again with you the same intellectual path that the first philosophers followed, in order to get their same insights and learn from them how to do philosophy. And let's take this seriously, more seriously, these points. And of course, before doing that, since we need to start walking somewhere, let's just ask ourselves the key geographical questions: where, when, who, how. So, where was philosophy born? Well, first of all, we say usually that philosophy was born in Greece. This is not entirely true. Philosophy was born in what we would call today Turkey. So on the Ionian region at that time, which was a Greek colony. So we are talking about the west coast of today's Turkey. And in a town, in a city called Miletus. So there are several historical reasons why people claim that it was born there. Maybe it was more, wealthy as a colony, not too close to some wars, and all these things. They are not my concern. But then it also, the second location will be more the best part of Italy, which is the south, of course. And well, this is not really a very truth statement, but I'm partial to the south. And then it went back to the mainland in Greece. So, but yes, it was born in the Greek culture, not in what today we call Greece, but in the Greek colonies. When? Well, that's not that easy to answer, because unlike today, we don't have everything available on the internet. So we even for the very first philosopher, the person who is supposed to be the first philosopher according to what ancient philosophers tell in their writings, even in his case, we don't even know exactly in what century he was born. So sometimes between the 7th and the 6th century, more likely in the 6th century. And some people try to locate exactly, locate chronologically his birth, because he predicted an eclipse, but it's not really clear which eclipse at that time he predicted. So anyway, and again, this is a historical concern for somebody else. But we are definitely a long time ago in this land, blessed by a very important civilization at the time that was already advanced enough to allow itself the leisure of just thinking and contemplating the truth. When people are too busy with life issues, they don't have food, they don't have safety, it's very hard to do philosophy. So philosophy is not the first thing you would find in history, in civilizations. But it's a very peculiar undertaking. So I already told you the who, where, when, who. Who is a philosopher called Thales, or Thales. I'm not entirely sure, but in Italian would be Talete, but that's much simpler pronunciation for us. So, but and why is he supposed to be the first philosopher? This is the first question we should ask ourselves. We are in a time in which poetry is actually having a very interesting outlook on reality, pretty much with the same vision that I was mentioning you, the vision of embracing it all. So if we go to the main, one of the main poets at that time, Hesiod, his cosmogony was trying to, look at the entire universe and trying to explain somehow the genesis of the universe. From chaos, he wrote, then it appears is generated the earth, Gaia, and then love, the Tartarus, and then Eros, love, and so forth, but including the day and the night and the ocean and the waves, all of them were kind of gods. So there is a connection between poetry and divine, which helps focusing on the overall explanation of things. But in poetry, again, we have a picture, we have some kind of poetic series of things. So we have chaos first, and then it appears the earth, but there is no causal connection. So why from one thing we have another? So Thales, for what we know, because we don't have any writing from Thales, we have just some fragments from other authors, and but apparently he said something about water. He said that water is the first principles of everything. To use a Greek term that became really crucial after Thales, is the arche, the origin and the principle and the cause of everything. And he also said that water was divine, the divine in everything. So why did he say that? Well, this is the interesting part. There is an attempt to explain. So water is, you see that humidity is everywhere. Things are reduced to water. It's kind of easy to see water everywhere. You see the seeds grow in the humidity, and water goes together with life, and everything kind of dries out somehow. So it's not that difficult if you are looking for some kind of common element that might explain everything to just say that it's water. So he did something which at that time was exceptional. He was trying to reason about a first explanation of the whole thing. So this reasoning was that kind of different path that we highlighted last time when we said that philosophy requires a rational path, not just a picture, an insight on something. Because at the level of insight, philosophy would be like poetry or like some kind of experience. So, but Thales tried to explain, tried to create kind of consistent reasoning. And what was he looking at? Sometimes people, when they go through some history of philosophy, okay, Thales might be, interesting for this first approach to nature in terms of reason, of causality and explanation, but he also may appear silly. Okay, to say that water is the divine in everything and is the first principle of everything, especially for us today, looks really something silly. And of course, I would never defend the claim that he was right, of course. It was very, early insight on reality from a naturalistic perspective. And so as interesting as it was at the time, it's not that interesting for us. However, we need to try to get deeper into it. So let's try if we can wonder more, contemplate more. Let's see if we can do Thales more justice. Let's forget about his conclusion and let's see what he was looking at. Let's see if there is something more to it that would make him really a smart guy. Let's work as attorneys. We are defending him now. So let's see what we find. So imagine to be Thales and look at yourself, not at yourself, look around you, at everything, including yourself. So why would you even look for a common principle of everything? Because, we need to make sense of his search first, and then see if it makes sense, the search. Then the conclusion might be wrong. But in philosophy, very often, it's only important to understand the question, not the solution. If we understand the question, we are halfway to the right conclusion. So, to me, I may be wrong historically, but I like it this way. To me, Thales started a train of reasoning which in a few years would become amazingly deep and productive, and raising issues and questions that we are still trying to answer today. They will go throughout the entire history of philosophy. And it was so fast at the time. I mean, it's like he got something on fire and then the entire building burned up. So what was so intriguing in this search? Why? Why would you look for something like that? Well, let's try to wonder. What would strike you if you are really trying to contemplate everything around you? What the first really deep insight you might get? What is so intriguing? Well, if you think about it, the most striking thing about everything in nature, and they had, in a sense, a better approach to nature than most of us today, because we live sometimes in very artificial environments, so we kind of miss sometimes the reality of nature. So, but when you look at everything, the most striking thing is probably that everything is changing. By changing, I mean that everything is becoming something else, to the point that everything becomes something different. So, and of course, we know that that's true. We know probably that that's true much more than Thales could actually see. And what's so interesting about it? Now, let's make it really cool. Let's make it logical. Let's try to get a logical point from this insight. Have you ever wondered what it means for something to change? For something to change, it means that something is not changing. I mean, logically speaking, when you predicate change of something, for example, you have this pencil here, and then you say that the pencil is here, so it went from here to there. Let's change name, right? So this is a change, right? But in order to predicate the change, we predicate the change of something, right? So this pencil was here, and now it's here. So to make this change possible, we need something that didn't change, the pencil. Otherwise, we can say that we have this cell phone here. I'm not using it. I actually use just the clock. But we have this cell phone here, and then this pencil here. Is this a change? No, they're two different things, right? So if I see something after another thing, it doesn't mean that something changed, right? But if something changed, that thing remained the same. Otherwise, we don't have a change. It's a logical point. It's a logical impossibility to have a change without something remaining the same. Most of the changes we see are changes in which clearly something is remaining the same, like this pencil being here and here, like me being a baby and now an adult, and like me being with a lot of hair and now not that much, right? All these are changes, and clearly you see both what remains the same and what is changing, right? And but what about nature, in which everything remains always the same? Everything is changing into everything else. I mean, clearly, if you don't have something that is not changing, the changing of everything into everything else is impossible. There is no change, right? So, and that's the most interesting part of this discussion, of this insight at the very beginning of philosophy. First of all, movement, change. Everything is changing. Everything is transforming, is becoming, to use a more successful philosophical term, becoming. But things can become, can change if something does not become and change. But sometimes these things that really remains the same is not like me. I'll die and I'll become ashes, and then probably again other things, including water, right? Actually, most of our bodies are made of water, probably more than 90%. I wouldn't be sure, but I know that it's a lot. So from that viewpoint, Thales was actually looking at the most, evident thing, at least in life. But again, what is it that doesn't change? What has to remain the same beneath even substantial changes from one thing to another, from a human being to a tree? What is it beneath that? So at that point, he starts a search which is logically correct. There must be something beneath every change that remains the same. Without something remaining the same, all these changes wouldn't be possible. We couldn't even call them changes. If you think about it, the opposite concept, compared to movement, to change, is creation. Creation is when something appears here, but is not coming from anything else that was already existing before. So it doesn't matter if it's I see a pencil here, I can see an elephant here. If the elephant appears without no connection whatsoever with anything before, it doesn't need any change. So, in creation, if you think about it, cannot be limited by a pre-existing thing. Otherwise, the creator would be not really God. In Greek culture, this is actually pretty much the kind of cultural idea they would have of a creator, even though the concept of creation as such is not in Greek culture. They would rather think of an unformed matter which is there before it is shaped into every other thing. And God would be this being who gives form to everything and molds it, as the kids do with these materials that I wouldn't remember what they're called in English, but you understand it, right? So this would be called demiurge in more classical terminology. So God as a demiurge is a God limited by what? By something that exists outside him and before everything, and it cannot but exist, because otherwise things will not become. But God would be limited by it. So the concept of that God would be limited by a pre-existing thing. If God is totally omnipotent, you can create whatever he wants without any limitation. That means that it cannot be a movement. In Christian theology would explain that creation cannot be called a movement, precisely for this reason, because if creation were a movement, it wouldn't be creation, and God would be limited by that process. But back to the change. It's again, I'm not defending Thales, but I'm saying that if you really look at everything this way, and you are surprised, you wonder, how is it possible that everything turns into everything else? Then you understand that logically this requires something beneath. And by the way, this something beneath, this cause, this first principle of everything, is also, in a sense, the reason why you can understand everything, because change will make things understandable. Is a variety of things that exist in the same ways that you can understand would actually make that thing understandable. This is not something that Thales would, at least as far as we know, made explicit. This requires, that this first principle is also intelligent somehow. Takes a little bit longer, but we will get there pretty soon. It actually belongs to the same period of philosophy than Thales, but it's easy to see that as divine, because if something really is the cause of everything, is beneath everything that we see changing and existing in the world, and if this principle is also, again, even implicitly in Thales, is principle of their being intelligent, it's easy to see that as something divine. I'm not saying it is philosophically correct, but it's part of the vision. It's part of the vision that you can get if you really look at the intelligible world changing and this logical necessity of having something that doesn't change. Now, as I told you, one of the most fascinating ways to understand philosophy, thanks to the Greeks, is to follow the initial path of this insight, this very insight about becoming and the need for a first principle. So, and I would say, I would dare saying, many other people might disagree with me, but the very first two important concepts and insights slash concepts slash insights, because we are more interested in a vision than a kind of very formal, defined, polished idea, are becoming and unity. So multiplicity and unity. So, and unity goes with nature, as we will see later on, but we already had sort of first approach to the concept of nature. So what we're going to do next time is to start seeing the development of this insight from Thales to his followers, colleagues in philosophy. Now, before we finish this class today, I just wanted to give you some more, a better picture of what of that age in philosophy and see who is coming next. So we have some more names, some more, context for our discussion. So I already told you that Thales was from what we call Turkey today, and from a Greek colony, and we are in between the 7th and the 6th centuries before Christ. He didn't leave any writing, and he would be in the usual historical sketches or outlines that you will find in the texts, and some of these things will be in our bibliography, of course. You would see that he belongs to the first school or period of ancient philosophy called, generally speaking, naturalism. Is a period mostly focused on philosophy of nature slash physics. I mentioned this to you. And there are some schools, that follows one another in this period, even chronologically. And Thales would be the first one in the so-called Ionian school, which is just the school from this region, from mostly Miletus and also Ephesus. And then we have the Pythagoreans. I mean, I'm sure you heard about Pythagoras. Pythagoras was one of the very first philosophers, and he was a very smart guy. I mean, his contribution to geometry and mathematics is very well known. Some people don't realize that he is, really from the 6th century before Christ. So it's really, and I mean, still we don't know exactly, but that's pretty much the period. And by the way, he was already, not anymore in Turkey, but we switched to the south of Italy with Pythagoreans. But he, that they didn't have numbers, right? I mean, I'm sure you know that numbers are a little bit later in time, so they are Arab. So what they did, they were so smart because they couldn't really calculate anything. They couldn't, they had to number things in the easiest way that people would do in ancient times, just writing a little sign down. So this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and they used usually little stones, on the ground to indicate, the numbers. But so they were great because they had to imagine everything. That's why they were so good in geometry, because they could imagine all the connections between figures and understanding the laws of the triangle and so forth. And then we have another school called the Eleatics. You might have heard of Parmenides, the big name in this school. We are going to mention a few more, of course, but now I'm just giving you a very little sketch. So, and the last school in this period would be the Pluralists, with names like Empedocles or Anaxagoras or Democritus. You might have heard of some of these people. Then after this, so in a sense, this school will teach us a lot about physics and, ancient physics and philosophy of nature. But then we have the so-called humanistic period, which would include sophists and Socrates. In this period, we will face the birth of moral philosophy, and it's already, a little bit further in time. So we are closer to the, the 5th century. We are definitely in the 5th century. And then we have a period that some people indicate as the period of the great synthesis in Greek philosophy, with some of the most brilliant thinkers of all time that are still the most competitive around. I mean, we are talking about Plato and Aristotle. I still feel envious. I mean, even if we have 2,500-ish years of advantage compared to them, but I think their mind was working at the level that we are still, trying to imitate. And we'll get a glimpse about that. Then we have another period following, which is the Hellenistic period. It's a period that takes its name from that moment in which Greek culture becomes international, thanks to the empire built by Alexander the Great, of which, by the way, Aristotle was a mentor. So Aristotle, interestingly enough, all these great figures in history have a connection. And Alexander the Great is this person who had this amazing vision of looking the whole world. He was the international guy at that time. So, and this period usually starts with his death, when his empire is really reaching the whole world. And in this period we have other schools of philosophy, which are Stoicism, Epicureanism, Epicurus, the famous philosopher of the garden, and skepticism and eclecticism. I'm just mentioning them now. We don't need to focus on them at this very moment, of course. And then we have an amazing development, which I'm just mentioning here, but it's important. It's that part of Greek philosophy in which philosophy gets in touch with the Christianity. And I'm not saying this just because I'm Catholic, but it's dynamite. This encounter in the history of our civilization is a big dynamite. The fathers of the church, so those thinkers who were, the first one living really in the very first centuries after Christ, their main concern, they were brilliant thinkers, and they were philosophers in a sense, but they were also theologians who were trying to understand the harmony between the truth that the philosophers before them already kind of discovered, for which they had the highest respect. They knew that Aristotle, Plato, all these people were genius, and they knew that truth was coming from their research and study. But they knew that there was a truth coming directly from God through revelation. So their whole point was to try to harmonize faith and reason, reveal truth and truth available to our reason. And this encounter and this, by the way, is the main feature of Christianity. I mean, the whole time until modern world, I mean, our intellectual history is all about harmony between faith and reason. Do you want to define the Christian time in terms of philosophy? That's what it is. It's faith and reason coming together. And just to get an idea, there are concepts that we use today in philosophy, and we use them all the time, that they acquire their meaning thanks to the encounter between faith and reason in that period. I'll give you an example, and I'll salute you until next time. Next class, the concept of person. So the concept of person is a concept that was introduced by Christian theologians to explain the harmony between nature, the concept of nature coming from philosophy, and the mystery of the faith, which are the Trinity and the incarnation of Christ. And this concept, exactly as it was developed by Christian theology at that time and philosophy, is the one that we still use today. And I'm not neglecting the fact that person is also a term used in in Roman law to indicate the mask and then the legal subject, but didn't have that meaning. So, and that's it. I'm out of time. So I'll see you next time. Thank you.